Hello, I'm Daniel Sevelt.
And I'm Jonathan Santarelli.
You may remember us from our podcast, The Audio Spectrum, and we are wicked excited to tell you about some new things Jonathan and I are up to.
That's right. Back in the winter time of this year, Daniel and I were putting the finishing touches on our brand new event company and record label, Magicland Entertainment and Magicland Music.
Right as we got all our ducks in a row, COVID-19 arrived. Temporarily ended social gatherings and put our dreams of gigs and shows and partying on the shelf. We decided to focus our effort on our new music and our new video podcast, Magicland's Big Dark Room. We'll be sitting down with veteran DJs and industry professionals, all stripes from the world of parties and raves and clubs, to catch their perspective on the evolving world of dance music and events today.
And we'll also be bringing you into the DJ booth for these artists' latest performances in our very own private event space.
Without further ado, let's welcome onto the program our first guest, Omari Nkosi from Tight Groove Recordings.
We have a fantastic guest on this week's episode. He has been really trailblazing along throughout the years as a DJ and producer, starting up his own label, and now he's back up in the New England area, really putting things together for himself. Really would like to welcome to the show, Omari Nkosi. How you been?
I've been well. Keeping busy. Got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Excited. Trying to stay positive and, with what's going on, so.
Many of the people watching this probably don't really know very much about you. You primarily produce and DJ techno and hard techno for a number of years under Tight Groove Recordings.
Correct. That's my record label, along with my production partner. We founded that along with a good friend of ours, James Spinney, about 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And prior to Tight Groove and forming that, Kevin and I, aka El Camino, were producing deeper stuff and house music under the alias The Collective and Bumps and Bridges. The interesting story about Audio Bigot is that was a name that I had come up with for what was supposed to be our super techno group, which was Elle and I and Hort and St. Pierre. And we literally only had one session where we sat down in the studio, and then just because of scheduling, we were never able to meet up again. So rather than just let that name die, because everybody thought it was such a great name, we decided to use it for ourselves. And I guess the basis behind the name Audio Bigot is essentially everyone, in a nutshell, is an audio bigot. There is certain types of music or genre, for the most part, that we relate to and like, and that we don't.
That's a very interesting take on something like that.
It was quite funny, actually, because when I first started actually promoting the name, a good friend of mine actually wrote to me, and she was like, "I don't like that name," and I asked her why, and she was like, "I just don't like that bigot thing," and I was like, "Well, for instance, you don't like techno too much. You're a house head. I'm a techno guy. I also love house, but on your standpoint, you're not much of a techno fan. So in that regards, you're an audio bigot." And she's like, "Oh, okay. I get it. I thought it was something else."
Okay. Yeah, she kind of had to pull herself out a little bit and put go inside your head.
Correct.
For that most part. That's really good. That's very cool. I like that, things that, names or ideas that make you think. When coming with that kind of idea for a name, is that the same idea on how you approach DJing and making music?
I mean, for myself and my production partner, you know, I guess really, if it's in lines with how are we, or what are we going to call this track, it's really more, you know, what does it make us feel? How do we feel? What's going through our heads when we're listening to it? Things like that. As far as, I would say, like events or anything like that, it would be a combination of, you know, what are we trying to convey through the lineup, through the venue that we're at, any of the lighting or decor that's going to be there, and maybe even based around what time of year it is, or if it's something around like a holiday.
So to elaborate a little bit more on sort of the production process, goes behind the actual production of the music, and what's your process? How do you get into that mindset?
Honestly, it's never the same. Sometimes it's situational. For instance, you know, Kevin and I keep in mind things like the label and the sound. So there could be times where you know, you sit down to write something specifically, maybe geared more towards a label's certain sound. And then there's times where there's stuff that you're tooling on already and have been dabbling with, and it, you know, just happens to fit. But so sometimes there is an intent, or there's an intentional, you know, I guess, writing of a type of song or track, and then the times that it's not are kind of my favorite. But it's definitely never the same.
In your approach, it's usually like some sort of like a sound or some sort of something that inspires you in that sense.
I mean, it could be
like
something that either an experience most recently, or something, a memory of one, or just maybe how you've been feeling lately, or just a melody in your head or something.
Yeah.
For me, those are where I draw my inspiration for writing material. And as far as you know, how things work in the studio, we're always working on at least 2 tracks at one time. A lot of times it's 3.
That's interesting.
Well, doing that, we find that you get less writer's block. Be having a session, and you know, if we're just not feeling it, or we're having, you know, kind of just hit a wall with a track, we're like, all right, put that one away. Let's start with this one. So it gives you, I guess, the freedom to kind of stay creative, but it also makes you more proficient at the same time, because a lot of times what ends up happening is you either finish 2 or sometimes even 3 tracks, all of them, you know, at the same time, or one right after the other, and then you're like, okay, next project.
I never really heard of anything quite like that before. I mean, usually it's like when Daniel and I are writing a song, we really fixate on just trying to complete that one particular song in that session. So as we don't get our idea muddied from other influences from other songs or something else, we kind of key in focus and try to get that particular idea right out the door and things like that. So it's really interesting that you do that.
That's actually very interesting on my aspect, because I've always wondered, I guess, how other duos work in the studio. I've never, you know, I've seen how Hort and St. Pierre do their thing together, and that's very similar to how Kevin and I work, as far as like shenanigans and trying to keep things, you know, funny. But to touch on your point where you were saying for you, you guys just try to stay focused and don't want any other, I guess, influence. Just, I guess for me, that naturally just happens with both of us. There'll be a lot of times, we'll be working on a track and Elle will start laying in some kind of melody, and it's for a hard techno label or something, and either the keys or just the melody will take the drive out of the track.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, hey, what are you doing? Are we not
at that same frequency?
Are we not keeping in mind, this is a hard techno track we're making for a hard techno label, or vice versa. A lot of times he'll be like, hey, I changed this since the last time I was thinking about it in my head. So I guess we kind of keep each other in check in that sense.
No,
and it's nice to vibe with somebody like that.
From what I've noticed from me producing my own music, there are times where I don't know if I'm going over a certain threshold. Because sometimes you'll be like, oh, I have this great idea for a song, and you start implementing, and then all of a sudden it's not from what you originally thought it would be, because there was nobody there to kind of be like, hey, this doesn't sound right.
Well, for us, I guess it doesn't, things like that happen.
Yeah.
But because there's multiple tracks and there is some intent as to, what the original idea may be, we find not forcing to make something it's not, and just not doing that, just kind of building and letting the track become whatever it's going to be, and that's happening with multiple tracks, and then they're done. Just a good feeling where it just generally either works out, that's what needs to happen. Yeah. And those tracks are going to go to their proper homes.
Right. And do you have the same approach when performing, when DJing? Is it very similar when you're alone, when you're doing it yourself, and then when you're with, for example, with Kevin doing Audio Bigot?
Well, when I'm with Kevin, we just kind of wing it at times. There's been, I want to say, maybe 2 gigs, max.
2
where
max.
We've been like, okay, let's program for a set. And then everything else is just generally, hey, let's do it. I definitely don't count like him sending me a couple tracks and being like, okay, this is the vibe, that I'm thinking. That's not the same thing as, for me to program a set. Versus, actually sitting down. We've got either all the tracks that I want to play and all the tracks that he wants to play, and we play them for each other, and then decide, who's going to come in, who's going to come in first, and how long, and like whatnot. And to me, that's programming, not just sending each other, okay, this is my vibe or what I was looking for, type deal. We do it both ways.
No, that's great.
In that sense, but the actual programming only happened once or twice. That's it.
Right.
Everything else has just been
just on a feeling
and just vibing off each other.
That's awesome. That's really good.
And that's one of the great things about working with somebody, and closely in that sense, because you get to pick each other's brains and be like, oh, and learn from each other.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I'm more on the technical side when I'm playing by myself, most definitely. Yeah. I generally just program for hours and just mix. Probably about a minimum of 2 hours a day.
It's good. That's a good
if
healthy.
I can, 4 hours, but that's been very rare lately.
Yeah. You've been really busy, so it's like trying to find that downtime in order for you to get plugged into your music.
There really isn't downtime, and I don't mind it because I love it.
Yeah. And one of the other questions too, coming along lines with like production and so on, how has your interaction with DJing using professional gear changed over the years? What are some of the changes that you have seen, and what have you incorporated into your sets?
Obviously, you see, I have my controller, and I'm a Serato guy. So, for instance, obviously, one of the first changes were CDJs. As far as since I've been DJing, guys that have been DJing longer than me have seen a couple more changes, depending how far back is how many changes you've seen. But for me, I've seen just the CDJs, then I would say the takeover as being the standard in the sense, and then vinyl kind of reducing as far as sales and production releases on vinyl over to digital files, which are a lot lighter than record cases.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But then there was control vinyl. And for me, that was my personal first changeover, was, kind of leaning away from my vinyl and or incorporating it with now control vinyl, and I still got to use my decks. And I mean, I would bring my turntables, my gear with me everywhere that I played. That's what I played on. So I would truck my mixer, my Serato box, my control vinyl, which was a lot lighter, and what actually was now my part of my record box, in a sense. I could actually use some vinyl in a soft bag, and then I'd have my laptop, my other record box.
Wow.
And then
Quite the setup.
for me, after a while, I got tired of lugging those things around. And I wanted them just to be at home. So the next step for me, because I know that CDJs are now the standard, and I can play on them, but they don't feel at home, I guess. I love the feel of a deck. I'm somebody that's used to mixing with the pitch rather than touching the turntable. Try not to at all. And just the sturdiness of the decks is what I was used to. So playing on CDJs and trying out other controllers, I put my hand on those jog wheels and they feel solid like a deck. So for me, that was, all right, this is close to home. But I'm also able to do a lot more now. It's compact. I can do everything that you can do on a CDJ, and it feels like a turntable when I put my hands on it, and what I'm most comfortable with. And I feel whatever you use for gear, I know there's the back and forth all the time, and the sync button and all that. Like, if an artist, no matter what medium an artist use to DJ, as long as they're using it to their fullest, who cares what it is? People that have been mixing for years have nothing to prove. It's what they do. And that's how I feel about, any discussion on, what gear you use in that sense. Use whatever, feels at home to you. But I feel that really, if you want to be, considered legit, learn to mix on turntables. You mix by ear and on turntables, you can mix on anything. And what happens with technology? It always messes up. I've had literally my computer freeze at a festival. That has happened before.
How did that scenario play out? What did you end up?
When you're in a situation like that, you just don't freak out. I'm sitting there playing, and Kevin and I were playing together, and I was second time going in as far as our set, and my computer freezes in the middle of a mix, and I had no mic. There was not a mic near me set up, so I'm on the stage, and I'm just like, sorry, as loud as I can.
Oh wow!
And it's the one time really that live I ever had an issue with Serato. other than little things like between my processor and a kind of controller I had, they did not talk to each other. And that happened one time. This was a major, like, computer froze, like, had to stop all music and restart.
Wow.
Not kind of like a little skip or a jump every once in a while type thing. So I'm just, out there, no mic, and I'm like, hey, sorry, effing Serato. That's it.
Yeah, that's all you can do, right?
And everybody just kind of laughed. I mean, I'm a Serato guy, just because it made the transition from vinyl to control vinyl very easy, and I just stuck with it. I know people have, their favorite thing. Some people like record box, some people absolutely hate it. Same thing with Serato or Tractor. Mm-hmm. Just use whatever
works.
Whatever works for you and whatever helps you emulate or able to, I guess, share with people when you're playing during that connection that you have with the crowd.
It's a really good thought. That's a great quote right there. I feel like I think I'm gonna steal that from you.
Copy written on Magically in 2020. Omari Nkosi. You can use it.
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit too, in coming together with Throwing Events and doing this, you started sort of a production company under the name of Pangea.
Well,
is that right, or am I?
Nope.
Is that
you're pretty spot on. Close.
Okay.
So, Pangea was a concept that I kind of have always had, and just never done. And it's essentially a group of like-minded people working together. We all come from different aspects of the industry, and all rep different affiliates. Yeah. But under this house, if you will. Anyone that is working together is Pangea. And we started doing events out west. I was kind of testing things. Did first event we had Donald Wad, and that was a lot of fun. And then the next event was local, and then I brought Melissa Nikita from New York out for our last one. And then just stopped doing them to focus on the 5 out here. And then I was gonna go back to including what we were doing out west.
Unfortunate, it's like you have this whole plan set out to kind of do things like that, but hopefully,
with that said,
yeah,
that the entire Pangea, I guess, the plan has kind of always, something has happened where we've had to divert from plan A. Yeah. And just kind of roll with the punches, and something else forms and happens.
Isn't that the whole thing behind Pangea anyways? It was the supercontinent that eventually changed into the things that we have now.
Correct.
That's a great name. That is a really good name.
I'm going to steal that analogy.
Go ahead, dude. Copyright, Magic Land Music, Magic Land Entertainment 2020. Let's get that one. Yeah. Because you have a lot going on right now. Why don't you delve into a little bit deep into that? Like, how are things going on right now, considering what is going on in the world in terms of the restrictions, and a lot of states have their own mandates. It must be difficult to navigate a lot of this kind of stuff. How are you dealing with it so far?
I got back in May, and I literally was not supposed to stay here. That just ended up happening. I came up to play a festival, and I never left. And come like December, January, I ended up deciding that I was going to do events again. So from that time until COVID, I literally spent all of my time outside of my day job focused on putting what was supposed to be 5 reoccurring events between weeklies and monthlies. And what was supposed to start in April obviously didn't.
Right.
So, there was a lot of, I guess, kind of waiting around, back and forth, a lot of communication with the venue, talking to, all the talent that we had booked, because, I book anywhere from 2 to 4 months out. So potentially if something had happened, like COVID, but was a lot shorter, it's easier to make adjustments if you need to. But with COVID hitting and things just being completely shut down, it kind of fell into play in a sense for the venue, because they needed to start work on and at least get a second room that one of my events was going to be grand opening, up and ready and at least decent and good enough to have people in.
Right.
So during COVID time, that was one of the things that was going on there.
Yeah.
It'll be 4 weeks ago, we started doing events again. Now, I definitely understand, the concerns, and we follow all of our guidelines per the state that we host events in by doing, touchless temperature checks, wiping down heavy traffic areas and tables at least once an hour, one way in, one way out, all that kind of stuff. On top of, social distancing with 6 feet, masks to enter, plenty of hand sanitizer. We're not doing the venue rather is not doing any garnishes or anything like that.
In drinks and things like that,
as far as, your straw, paper still on it. We don't want to make anyone feel unsafe at the same time. We want people to, be safe while they're in there. Our job is to make people feel comfortable if they want to go out and to minimize a risk.
Because you're doing everything within the guidelines of the state that you're in.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay. It's definitely different, obviously, that how things are being done nowadays and how that is going to have residual effects on the scene itself. Do you see something in terms of the future of these types of protocols or this type of mandates to be being implemented for a number of years?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you that. It's kind of still fresh. That might be a good question for everyone involved in the senior industry to ask themselves at least in a year and a half. From a promotion or organization standpoint of events, your DJ pool is much smaller. You can't do things like have any touring headlining talent. A, they're not taking gigs, and B, people aren't coming out. Things like having your capacity reduced to 50% definitely hurts the venue, but when you take in consideration things like not a lot of people are coming out at the same time,
Yeah.
you just can't do big events. It's just
Right.
not possible. Big talent, it's not possible.
So you have to figure out other ways of trying to interact with the community.
Well, really, at this point, if you're doing an event, at least for us, all of our events are, there's this thing that we love, and we are being as safe as possible, doing as closely as to what we used to do prior to this. Now at this point in time during this, for me, that's something that's keeping me positive. It's just kind of interesting, I guess, to look back and who would have thought, something like this would be going on.
Yeah.
And of all industries could decimate almost.
Overnight.
Overnight.
Yeah. You really have to reinvent yourself or reinvent the structure of putting together events like that?
It's kind of like a test, anyways, from our standpoint. I'm noticing certain things. I'm able to gauge now an average number of people that are coming out, just to kind of, I guess, tread water. And really, for us, it's providing a place, if you choose to come out, to go to where you feel safe, and a place where, if you choose to gig, a place to do so. In a sense.
Trying to think about, like, what's the future going to look like? I mean, what do you have planned for yourself coming up in the closing of this year? I mean, we're getting into the fall, and winter creeps up, and things tend to slow down, and so on. I mean, what do you see yourself doing?
For me, honestly, I generally, when it comes to events, if you're touching on that aspect in this time, other than providing a place, like I was saying, more of my focus is on music and production. Actually, the winter time is where Elle and I, or Kevin and I, kind of do a lot of our work and the most of it. So that's just traditionally where I'll be. I don't know if by then these events will still be going on. I would like to be able to continue to do them. I'd like to see them to grow, or just maintain.
Yeah. And in terms of like future concepts or like doing stuff with events, I mean, what's your take on live streaming and how a lot of artists, especially bigger ticketed artists, are really kind of gravitating towards that?
I mean, it makes sense. It to kind of, I guess, be a very, how shall I say, okay substitute, since you don't have a lot of
ways of
actually either
doing a live show,
hearing, artists at the time, as far as like live stuff. So I also think it's a reset button in a sense, because if you notice, you have a lot of the comments that I see on stuff, especially at the beginning of the streaming, what I'll call peak, is, I've never heard this kind of music before, things like that. And yet, honestly, I have yet to actually stream. I literally have just been releasing mixes still. Had a place to stream, I was going to. I ended up setting up the studio two weeks, and then I ended up having to dismantle it. And then I just never really had a spot that I could stream from. The interesting thing about streaming is I did a streaming show 9 years ago called Techno Terrorists.
Techno Terrorists, oh my God.
And we would we would literally broadcast from wherever we were. And it wasn't one specific place. It could be at, my boy's house or another friend's house, or sometimes at a venue. We never did anything like outside. That was the next step that we were going to attempt. Just never happened, and I ended up getting lost in the record label and production, so it just kind of faded away.
Well, I mean, honestly, I think that moving on into the future, I think you're really going into, you're in a pretty good place, and I really wish the best for you. I like how you are rolling along with the punches and really, try and provide a really good, safe space for people to go out and listen to music and dance. Yeah, man, thank you so much for coming up here on the show.
Thank you for having me, man.
I really, really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you would like to tell the listeners or the people watching this, kind of like what you got going on in the future? Any new releases that you have coming up?
Actually, November 2nd on Oxitec Recordings. There is something coming out. Elle and I, Audio Bigot, and Cole is the main artist, and then Audio Bigot and Rave Syndicate are on it as well. So I'm excited for that release. I love working with Rave Syndicate. I love those guys.
Yeah.
And Cole, I actually met in North Carolina while I was down there. So, you know, that's how I ended up meeting him. And he had his first release on Tight Groove. I want to say about 6 months ago. But we've been working with him since. Even projects on other labels that we release on, like SMR or Toxic, for example. But yeah, I mean, just always putting out something, at least every couple months. So.
Sure. That's awesome, man. Well, thank you so much, Omari. Really appreciate it, man, for taking the time and effort to come out here and do this interview.
Again, thank you for having me.
So coming up next, we've got Omari Nkosi going to be doing a sweet DJ set with all sorts of great music. Not exactly sure what he's going to be throwing down. That's to be the best part. So definitely check that out when it posts.
I actually don't mind telling you.
Oh, you want to tell us? Okay.
You know, that it's...
What the fuck are you gonna play?
Yeah, what are you going to play?
It's definitely going to be techno, but I'm a guy that doesn't just do straight anything. So it's going to be techno and subgenres of such. Tech house, some progressive thrown in there, and some hard techno.
Awesome. All right. Well, we very much look forward to checking that out. If you want to catch more of Omari Nkosi, definitely check out on the description below on our YouTube page right here, and we'll be able to catch all of the links. I got his Facebook, Twitter, all the stuff, so you can go and check out Omari Nkosi, Tight Groove Recordings, and also his duo Audio Bigot, him with El Camino. Make sure to subscribe to Magic Land Entertainment for all the latest updates. Make sure to go up on our webpage too as well, magiclandentertainment.com. So keep a watch out on for that.